Hello, everyone. Our presentation is of Indigenous life pre and post colonialism. Our group members consist of Marselina, Dalaina, Irahi, Angelica, Thania, and Jacqueline.
My name is Marselina Maldonado. In this slide, I will be giving a brief summary regarding the indigenous life pre-colonialism. And my main focus will be the Chumash tribe. The Chumash lived along the coast of California between the beaches of Malibu to Paso Robles. They inhabited inland to the western edge of the San Joaquin Valley. They were hunters, gatherers, and fishermen who lived in large dome-shaped homes made of willow branches, and their villages became more permanent as they advanced through bow-making, basketry, stone cookware, and the ability to harvest and store food. They were also distinguished as the finest boat builders among the California Indians. They went from manual laborers to skilled crafters to chiefs to shaman priests who were also accomplished astronomers. The shaman was a religious leader, often giving plants for spiritual purposes. Women could also serve equally as chiefs and priests. And the Chumash had a shaman or astrologer who possessed special abilities, who observed the sky and sought the guidance of astrologers to interpret and advise the people. They also believed that the world was evolving, and so they relied on the charts to make important decisions in their villages.
Summary: Indigenous life post-colonialism. During the colonialism, Indigenous Native American faced forced relocation. Europeans colonizers violently took over territories from Indigenous Native Americans, leading to the cause of loss, hunting grounds, agriculture lands, and sacred space. Second, cultural suppression and assimilation. European colonizers seek to force their cultural, religious, and societal norms on Indigenous Native Americans, making Indigenous languages, religions, and traditions suppressed or vanished, which resulted loss of cultural identity. Third, social disruption and family construction, displacement, violence and diseases developed and downfall of family and community structure, dominating generational trauma among Indigenous Native American population. All these three signifies a hegemonic system that has been deep-rooted and expanded by the European nation. It's a system that has represented through leadership, power, and dominance.
I will be talking about the examination of a phrase that was found within our topic. All of my quotes are from This Land Was Mexican Once by Linda Heidenreich. My quote states the pre and post colonization of the indigenous people. And specifically, my first quote will indicate kind of a little bit of both. So the first quote states, as Eduardo Galeano argued en El Descubrimiento que todavía no fue, there were Spaniards even in the 16th century who saw the indigenous peoples that had their own valued culture and history. Instead, it is to say that the Spanish colonizers who came to Central California came to the area with a belief system that divided the world into good, evil, God, and Satan, civilized and uncivilized. So this quote is practically saying how before the colonization ever took place, indigenous people had their own value and culture, which they appreciated, and their history, which they appreciated both equally. And they were fine, their lifestyle, they had no issue with it. It wasn't until the colonizers came to invade their land, their culture, their belief, their language, their religion, everything that identifies as who they are. It's when the civilization became civilized and uncivilized. It practically dehumanized them from their own lifestyle. To the next quote, it states, those who refused to cooperate with the colonizers were attacked and subbed by soldiers from Sonoma's Preciado. So this quote is more referencing to after the colonizations, where once they were colonized, they were obligated to cooperate with the forced lifestyle that the Spaniards were trying to force upon the indigenous people. So next quote states indigenous histories also continued through the U.S. invasion, where Californians were taken prison and California homes were robbed. Indigenous people were shot down in the streets of Sonoma. So at this point, really, we're just already seeing how ethnic cleansing took place in a way where they were already getting shot down just by being in the streets. So there was no safe place for the indigenous people at this point, because I guess at this point, if they were to even be seen, they would get shot down. So at this point, they were really just going to try to hide. And I think that's very unfortunate for the indigenous people. And the picture at the top, it demonstrates how the colonizers came to the indigenous land to force upon them their own beliefs, to take land away from them.
It's a major theme discussed during the post-colonialism of the indigenous people. After the colonization of indigenous people, the European Spaniards maintained their power by enforcing the assimilation of the indigenous population into their society under their laws. During the 18th century, the elite European Spaniards introduced the casta system. So the casta system can be seen as a symbol of the separation of indigenous people and Spaniard elites through their status in society. This system constructed the classification of the status of an individual based on the individual's ethnicity. As seen in the image, individuals with a white partner had a superior social position in society than indigenous people or African American people. So after years of independence, the casta system inevitably did enforce European social stratification and impacted generations of the indigenous population. So to have a better understanding, we could look at these quotes from the novel This Land Was Mexican Once. One of the first quotes states, "By the late 18th century, a Spanish colonial racial system was firmly established in Alta California. The system was stable and porous. It provided structure to a larger society. People at the top of the racial order had access to the best jobs, while those at the bottom labored in a state of peonage." So the system the quote refers to is a casta system, and it did create to ascribe social status to individuals based on their ethnicity. So essentially, the mobility of individuals in society was determined by their position in the casta system. And as stated, individuals with a higher social status, mainly Europeans or with European partners, held the best positions in society. The second quote states, "One level down from the Español was the rank of mestizo, or person of half Indian, half European ancestry, and at the bottom of the Spanish racial taxonomy was the Indio, or person of pure Indian descent." So this quote references the casta system as well, and its goal was to maintain Europeans as the superior race in society. So the third quote, under Spanish rule, the residents of northern Alta California had lived in a class-stratified society, where status was tied to the ethnic origins of their ancestors, military services, and access to land. This last quote does remind me of how the casta system impact the social perception of individuals who were not of European descent based on the labels that they were given in our past history.
Moving on to gender, the focus of this slide is on the Tongva tribe. In the book City of Inmates, it describes the Tongva Basin as being highly gendered labor, where women gathered and cooked foods. They also made utensils to eat and store food, and men hunted. They were also involved in trading and craft making. Regarding men and women training, both men and women of the younger generation were educated by their parents and elders about different aspects of their community, which included the lands, the seasons, also resources in their community, which often included a principal settlement, numerous hunting and gathering camps, religious sites, and large fields of games and celebrations. Skill work was also gendered. Men taught their sons how to build boats or craft arrowheads, and women taught their daughters how to weave the basin's sturdy grasses, some of which grew 6 feet high, into baskets, and their baskets were a vital source, vital social and economic commodities. And this was all found in City of Inmates on page 19 through 20.
The demonstration of resistance and race, we see it through the California testimonials and /writings. But, yeah. This quote states, "This literature of resistance is also found in testimonials in the Spanish language press and in the personal correspondence of Chicanas, Mexico indigenous people throughout California, created a similar language of resistance to be passed through generations in their own communities and strategically introduced to anthropologists narratives of resistance that directly challenged the racist and forgetful narrative of the dominant Euro-American culture." And so this quote is practically saying how even with everything that happened with the colonization, indigenous people still challenged what was made and, what was said and shared about them through the negative perspective of Euro-American culture. Because their culture was seen as a culture of like, oh yes, they were right, but they weren't right because They came to invade a land that didn't belong to them. They forced them religion, language, a different culture belief. And they were fine. They were fine the way they were. As we read previously in my previous quote, how they valued their own lifestyle and their own history. They were fine, Indigenous people, until the invasion occurred. And we see how in real life situations there is Ernest, Renan, and Homie K. Bahaba, who actually wrote in their testimonials how the equilibrium was never going to exist in the nation, and how the instability of the nation that caused this to be like tragic, because there's a one side of history always, and that's very unfortunate. And it's not until our own culture who could bring it up and challenge what was being said and write otherwise of the truth. That's the thing about our oral history. When we do oral history interviews, we're able to get the perspective of a depth understanding of our own history. And just like it's happening here with the Indigenous, if it wasn't for these testimonials, for interviews that took place, we wouldn't know about it.
An example of resistance on class, I will be talking about the Chumash Revolt of 1824. The Chumash Revolt of 1824 began in the three of the California missions, which included Santa Ynez, Santa Barbara, and La Purísima, which lasted a few days. This revolt is recognized as the largest organized resistance movement to occur during the Spanish and Mexican periods in California, as mentioned in Professor Cupchoi's Thursday Week 2 slides. The revolt took months of planning as the Chumash people prepared to go against the colonizers and religious leaders for the mistreatment and poor living conditions that they had to endure. Despite there being specific planning that went into executing this rebellion, the revolt started a day sooner than they had planned. After witnessing a little boy be beaten for simply going to visit a relative in Santa Ynez, the Chumash people decided it was time to revolt. A Chumash elder discusses what triggered the revolt in a video we had seen in class in week 2. The elder describes this beating of the boy as the straw that broke the camel's back. He states that all of them had been beaten, all of them had been underfed, and all of them had been worked to death, and yet it was the abuse of power towards this little boy that they said enough is enough. A quote also from this same Chumash elder that I think fully encompasses this revolt is, "Here's a tribe of people that are not warlike. They were forced to. They had no choice. We have to stand up and say, we're not going to take this anymore." I think this quote fully encompasses what this revolt is about, in the sense that these Chumash people did not want to resort to violence. They were led to that point because of all the violence that they themselves had to endure because of the colonizers, because of the missions and the church. And I think this fully encapsulates what it means to have a breaking point, especially as people going through genocide and having to be at a lower standing class in a class system that they did not ask for, that was imposed.
So, a form of resistance to the history of oppression toward the Indigenous population was the reclamation of the Indigenous language. This first quote references the perception society had of Indigenous people's culture, language, and history. It states, "There was also language that often referred to American Indigenous people as savages, even when discussing their virtues. What we have in the readers, is a normalizing of Euro-Americans as true Americans." So this quote shows us how there was discrimination against Indigenous people, especially Indigenous speakers were oppressed and their languages were destroyed by colonizers to argue the superiority of their own culture and assert their dominance. The second quote states, "Yet language played an important role in the organization of California Indian societies. This is because throughout the Central California culture area, people within the same language group held aspects of material culture such as basket weaving, techniques, and design in common." So this quote explains the importance of Indigenous language in Indigenous communities and its connection to the Indigenous culture. Continuing to speak their Indigenous language meant the continuation of practicing their Indigenous culture. And this last quote, it states, "Trade networks were facilitated by shared cultural traits among Central California communities. At the same time, ongoing trade between people from various language groups encouraged continuing culture exchange, thus contributing to further commonalities in culture, gender roles, and economic system throughout the Central California region." So this quote allows us to see how Indigenous languages were more than a form of communication. When individuals share a common language, they form a community and therefore their cultural identity.
Resistance of religion. In the book This Land Was Mexican Once, on page 16, Spaniard colonizers who came to Central California came to the area with a belief system that divided the world into good and evil, God and Satan, civilized and uncivilized. A system that divides the world into good and evil is a belief system that rooted in dichotomy, a perspective that classifies things into pairs such as God and Satan, civilized and uncivilized. These viewpoints often created interaction with the indigenous Native American population and the environment Europeans encountered during colonization. Spiritual resistance. Various resilient indigenous Native American communities drew strength from their spiritual beliefs and practices to hold out against the cruelty of colonization. Spiritual leaders engage important roles in organizing resistance movements and keep in existence cultural unity. For example, ceremonies, rituals, and prayers were passed down as an action of defiance. Another example is a transformative spiritual connection that young women go through menstruation rooms. It's a sacred space to learn and pass on spiritual traditions.
Hello, everyone. My name is Angelica Preciado. I will be talking about empowerment through oral history. To start off with, I will just read an excerpt from Heidenreich's novel. Acknowledging that stories and events in the present remain connected to the past is very important. So kind of breaking it down, it's really saying that it's important to acknowledge and learn from the past as it's connected to the current day or current histories, which ties into oral history itself. So oral history among the Indigenous community has always been a form of empowerment through hardships, especially during and post-colonialism. So oral histories, they offer a first-hand account of significant events, personal histories, and personal family histories, which is really, really important when you're trying to preserve traditions, empower one's own community. So within the Indigenous community, oral histories empower their communities because oftentimes history is only taught and talked about through a white lens, which is exactly how it sounds like. It's only talked about through a white man's perspective, and it often, if not entirely, excludes the personal first-hand accounts and oral histories of Indigenous communities, which is why oral history is so important and is a form of empowerment within the Indigenous community. So, as noted by Heidenreich, acknowledging and understanding the traditional ways of passing history is critical to understanding traditional and regular history in its entirety. Here on this slide, I will be talking about our own oral histories. So to start off with, I will be talking about Jose. So Jose immigrated to the US in the early 80s to pursue a better life like many others. He faced significant barriers and hardships throughout his life that have shaped him into the man he is. And his biggest goal has always been to be the best version of himself. Then we have Irma. Irma migrated to the US in 1998 from Mexico to attain a more prosperous life and opportunities. Although her primary goal was to assist her brother with his family, she reflected it was in the best interest of her family to do so at that time. Now we're going to talk about Luz. Luz faced financial struggles, but through it all, showcased her resilience throughout her life. Her top priority was ensuring a safe environment for her family and maintaining a strong-knit community in her life. Guadalupe faced significant discrimination for speaking her native language, Mextico. I apologize if I pronounced it incorrectly, which showcases a connection between her story and countless others who have faced the same, which over time has resulted in a decline in the use of native languages. Margarita shared her hardships in trying to pursue an education and escape poverty. After becoming a DACA recipient, she was able to prosper and build the life she has always dreamed of. And finally, but not least, is Kaylee. She is a first-generation DACA student who aspired to become a doctor, but her career options were limited, unfortunately, due to her legal status. She is currently a student obtaining her certification in cosmetology and is always striving to thrive and reach success. And here are all of their beautiful faces. We have pictures or symbols that really represent who they are and their personalities in the best way that we can.
Finally, this is the cultural product that my group and I have created, which is a zine, again, on the topic that we had just presented on, Indigenous life before and after colonialism. So yeah, there's a bunch of elements that come into this zine. Part of it is informational, again, based off the information that we had just presented on in our slides. And parts of it are artistic, including collages. So again, informational as well. Right here, we quote some of the readings that we've done in class throughout the semester. And here are some examples of collage work that our group mates have made. Just a visual representation of life pre-colonialism. And here another beautiful collage by Dalaina on how colonialism took away the history of many indigenous tribes. So a visual representation of post-colonialism. Here we have, again, just reiterating information from our slides using some visuals and it being informational as well. Again, more collage work done here as well, referencing information that we've included in our slides. This one is mine as well, just referencing information both found in class readings, in class lectures, also including videos that we've seen in class as well, quoting some information from Chumash elders right here. Yes, more information that we've included in our slides, more collage work here as well. And here we start to get into the information we did for our oral history projects. So we each individually decorated our own pages based off the interviewee that we each had. So we decorated our page based off how we felt best represented the person we interviewed and their life journey and what they had gone through. So here, Angelica's interviewee, she did a visual representation of how she thought best fit her interviewee. Here is Irahi's interviewee, again, including some photos of them that she thought best represented them. Here is mine as well, just some collage work and just showing how I thought best represented her journey. Here is, I believe, Marselina's interviewee as well, showing some photos of where she's from, including some photos and a quote here as well by her interviewee. Here we have Jacqueline's interviewee, again, showing some artwork that she thought best showed her journey as well. And finally, we have Dalaina's interviewee showing some more collage work based off her interviewee's personality and her life story. And yes, that concludes our zine. It's just several elements of collage work, storytelling as well, through showing some artwork based off the people that we interviewed for our oral history, as well as including some informational elements based off class readings, class videos, and lectures, demonstrating all that we've learned on the topic that we had just presented. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you.